One passenger sealed 3 balconies in black plastic to photograph the stars, then billed the ship for his ruined duct tape. Another filed an official complaint against a whale. Across the Hawaiian Islands, the same strange pattern repeats. The fancier the cruise, the more certain some guests become that paradise, and everyone working in it exists to obey them. 1. The plastic ruler was the detail that finally broke the chef. Dennis, 58, a retired parking enforcement officer from Indiana, had a palate so violently opposed to flavor that it probably belonged in a medical textbook. Plenty of people are fussy eaters. Dennis operated on another level entirely, treating any food that hadn't been sealed in a Midwestern factory as a personal threat to his safety. So when the ship docked in Lahaina, and the galley proudly rolled out a gorgeous, absurdly expensive yellowfin, hauled in that very morning, the evening buffet turned into a stampede. Guests were nearly shoving each other aside for the ruby-red sashimi and the seared steaks. Dennis stationed himself at the front of the carving station, arms folded, staring down this magnificent fish like it had keyed his sedan in the lot. He summoned the maitre d' and announced at full volume that the tuna was a disturbing shade of purple and had roughly the structural integrity of a wet sponge. He would not eat it. He also refused to eat anything else the ship had to offer, which is an ambitious plan for a 14-night voyage. Instead, he ordered the chef to take a $50 slab of sashimi-grade fish, lay it flat on a board, and shave it down with a plastic ruler into a perfect 3x5 rectangle. Then came the true horror. He instructed the chef to bury that flawless filet in thick batter, roll it in the cheapest breadcrumbs aboard, and deep fry it in industrial oil until it looked exactly like something pried off a frozen supermarket tray. The chef presented this felony against the sea on a gleaming silver platter. Dennis took a single bite, curled his lip in disgust, declared it still tasted wrong, and demanded the cruise line radio a mainland school cafeteria to track down the proper recipe. 2. Why is the mountain turned off? That was the actual question a woman in a $2,000 silk caftan slapped onto the guest services counter, brochure and all, on the third afternoon at sea. Marlene from Phoenix had booked a 14-night island hopper on a major American line for exactly one reason: to photograph molten lava pouring into the Pacific. She had prepared like she was mounting an invasion: titanium tripod, 3 separate light meters, and a telephoto lens so enormous it rode in its own padded rolling case. She'd even laminated an itinerary that clearly promised 9 p.m., evening scenic cruising past Kilauea. One small thing refused to cooperate. Kilauea wasn't erupting that month. The volcano was resting, calm as a mill pond, keeping its magma politely underground. Nature had taken the week off. Marlene had not. And there is no force on Earth capable of explaining plate tectonics to a woman who has already paid for the balcony. She jabbed her finger at a tiny, wildly oversaturated stock photo of liquid fire and demanded answers. The young purser named Raphael gently explained that the cruise line does not personally control the planet's tectonic plates and cannot schedule an eruption for a Tuesday. Marlene didn't flinch. She hauled a highlighted copy of the cruise contract out of her tote and accused the company of breaching an implied promise of lava. When Raphael repeated that the volcano was asleep, she rolled straight into her backup demands, and this is where it got spectacular. First, she wanted the captain to steer the entire 140,000-ton ship into the restricted coastal waters to get us closer to the heat and maybe jolt it awake. Told that was both illegal and an excellent way to sink everyone, she leaned across the counter with her real solution: point the theater's stage spotlights at the crater on shore and pump thick fog off the upper decks to, in her words, recreate the atmosphere I already paid for. She'd bought a premium oceanside balcony for this exact 2-hour window, so drama was owed to her by contract. The standoff ran 45 excruciating minutes. It only ended when Raphael, looking thoroughly broken, produced a free plate of warm chocolate lava cake from the steakhouse. She took the cake, ate it in the atrium, and promptly filed a written grievance demanding half her fare back because the Pacific Ocean had failed to deliver fireworks. 3. To shave a few $100s off a luxury Hawaiian sailing, Kevin and Danielle from New Jersey booked the absolute cheapest windowless inside cabin on Deck 3, a room buried so deep in the hull it practically shared a pillow with the engines, which was a perfectly reasonable trade-off right up until the second morning when Kevin decided that actually living with the consequences of his own budgeting was an intolerable outrage. He stormed up to guest services, smacked the glossy brochure onto the counter, and stabbed a finger at a line praising the healing, restorative power of the Polynesian trade winds. The air conditioning in his cabin, he announced, was nothing but recycled hallway air with every last tropical ion scrubbed out of it, and that, to him, was a flat-out breach of contract. He wanted an instant, free upgrade to an aft balcony suite, so his pores could finally drink in some genuine ocean. The manager calmly turned her screen around to show the ship sailing at 100% capacity, not one bed to spare. Kevin waved it off and suggested she simply kick out a guest who mattered a little less than he did. Denied and quietly furious, he decided that if nobody would hand him a balcony, he'd help himself to a slice of the public deck instead. And you truly have to sit for a moment with the raw physical labor this next part required. Around 2 in the morning, the pair stripped their cabin down to the frame. They wrestled that enormous king-sized mattress off its base, shoved it out into the corridor, and dragged it down what must have felt like a mile of hallway carpet. They crammed it into the glass atrium elevator, rode up to Deck 10, and heaved it out onto the open-air pool deck. There they built a complete bedroom inside a premium poolside cabana, cabin pillows, duvet, 2 swiped bathrobes, and all. When the dawn patrol found the two of them fast asleep beside the main pool around 5:30, the officer politely rapped on the cabana frame to wake them. Kevin did not leap up in embarrassment. He cracked one eye, hauled the duvet up to his chin, and calmly informed the officer that the cabana was now legally his under some ancient homesteading law of the sea he'd apparently invented on the spot. Then he pointed at the speechless man and reeled off his orders. Stop talking, bring 2 room service breakfast menus, and radio the bridge to sail a little more gently, because the waves slapping the hull kept interrupting his sleep. Then he shut his eye and rolled back over, fully expecting every word of it to happen. 4. Leonard, a retired quality control inspector from Arizona, loved pineapple with a devotion that bordered on the fanatical, and when he booked a trans-Pacific crossing from Los Angeles to Honolulu, he fully expected to be buried in flawless local fruit the instant he stepped aboard the 4,000-passenger ship. That fantasy survived right up until the second sea day. He wandered over to the breakfast station, studied the neat cubes of yellow glistening in their steel trays, narrowed his eyes like a detective at a fresh crime scene, and reached into his tactical cargo shorts. Out came a digital Brix refractometer, the actual optical instrument farm inspectors use to measure the precise sugar content of a crop. He dripped a bead of the buffet's pineapple juice onto the sensor, held it to the light, squinted through the lens, and loudly pronounced the fruit a cheap mainland knockoff. Now, how on earth do you win an argument with a man calmly running laboratory equipment before sunrise? You don't even try. For 3 straight days, Leonard refused to touch a single cube without a full forensic audit first. He'd turn up at 6:15 sharp, sail past the entire line, and back the food and beverage manager into a corner. Ordinary complaining was beneath him. He demanded that the executive chef physically produce the bills of lading and the import manifest for the ship's fruit supply. A vessel bound for Hawaii, he thundered, had no business plating pineapple grown in Ecuador, and he treated this dull fact of global shipping like a blade slipped between his ribs. Eventually, he claimed a corner table as his personal command post, ordering the waiters to haul him whole, unpeeled pineapples straight from the galley so he could inspect each crown and every inch of skin himself. Only then would he grant the kitchen his royal permission to cut one into his morning yogurt. 5. The torches were lit. 80 guests were settling onto the Maui sand for an authentic Polynesian luau, and Sylvia was already demanding someone roll out artificial turf so the beach wouldn't touch her pedicure. Sylvia and Gordon, a couple from Oklahoma, craved genuine culture, as long as it came sanitized, air-conditioned, and bent completely around their schedule. They'd bought the priciest excursion offered during the ship's overnight in Maui, the premium authentic Polynesian luau, which promised fire dancers and a whole pig roasted underground in a traditional imu pit. The friction started the instant the bus doors opened. Sylvia surveyed the torch-lit shore and informed the guide that the sand was far too uneven for her designer orthopedic wedges. Things truly boiled over when they dug up the pig. As the rest of the crowd cheered the steaming Kahlua pork rising out of the hot rocks and earth, Gordon watched like he was witnessing a public health catastrophe. He marched up to the head chef mid-ceremony, cut clean through a sacred Hawaiian blessing chant, and demanded to see a USDA inspection certificate for the animal. His dinner, he announced to the baffled crowd, had spent the afternoon stewing in a filthy hole in the ground like a forgotten root vegetable. Then he ordered the staff to grill him a plain, skinless chicken breast on a freshly sanitized countertop grill because he refused to trust meat cooked by the planet's crust. 10 minutes later, Sylvia flagged down a server. The kerosene fumes from the Samoan fire knife dancers, she complained, were fighting with her floral perfume, and she wondered whether the warriors might switch to little battery-powered LED batons. With the patience of actual saints, the organizers gently suggested the event might not suit the couple's hygiene standards and arranged a private taxi back to the sterile safety of the ship. Gordon and Sylvia accepted at once and stormed off, grumbling about backwater service. You'd assume a retreat into a climate-controlled suite would end the saga. It was only intermission. Gordon felt robbed of his feast. Back aboard, he marched to guest services and demanded the engineering team carve a small roasting pit into the teak decking of the Deck 9 pool area. When the hotel director flatly refused to drill a hole in a billion-dollar ship, Gordon resolved to host his own civilized luau. At 11:45 p.m. sharp, the bridge lit up with a priority fire alarm from a smoke detector in an aft suite. 2 security officers sprinted down the corridor and shouldered the door open. They found Gordon on the balcony in a plush white robe, a hotel hairdryer in one fist, and a smuggled travel iron in the other. He had lifted a 12-pound glazed ham from the midnight buffet, set it on a silver room service tray, and was earnestly trying to roast it. He pressed the scorching iron flat against the rind to sear it, then blasted the whole thing with the hairdryer to fake an open flame. The melting sugar glaze had begun pumping thick, sticky black smoke up the stern of the ship. Just inside, perfectly serene, Sylvia was weaving a traditional lei out of cocktail napkins and mint-flavored dental floss. Ordered to drop the appliances and step away from the smoldering ham, Gordon jabbed a sticky, glaze-coated finger at the officer and told him to take his shoes off before stepping onto the balcony because this was a sacred, private ceremony. 6. Raymond had one mission for his 15-night trans-Pacific Hawaiian crossing, and it had almost nothing to do with Hawaii. A 64-year-old retired radiologist from Seattle, he wanted to photograph the Milky Way and the ancient Polynesian navigation stars from the blackest patch of open ocean on the planet. So he hauled aboard more than $20,000 of astrophotography gear, including a motorized star tracking mount and a telescope roughly the size of a naval torpedo. The flaw in his grand plan was that Raymond had badly misjudged what a modern cruise ship actually is. He pictured a hushed, darkened vessel gliding silently across black water. What he boarded was a floating neon carnival, throwing off more light than a mid-sized town. On the very first sea day, at 10 at night, he descended on the guest services desk, practically humming with fury. He slapped a star chart onto the counter and demanded to see the captain. His formal requests were as follows: kill every exterior deck light, shut off the giant poolside LED screen currently blasting a romantic comedy, and power down the ship's rotating radar because he was convinced the radio waves were corrupting his camera sensor. The remarkably calm night manager walked him through a little maritime law. Switching off your navigation lights in a busy shipping lane, he explained, is wildly illegal and a superb way to get 4,000 people killed. Raymond was unmoved by trivial concerns like mass casualties. He cared about optical clarity and nothing else. He'd paid for a premium aft balcony, he argued, so the universe owed him a mathematically flawless view of itself. When the manager refused to drop the entire ship into darkness, Raymond decided to solve the problem with his own 2 hands. And nothing on this earth is more dangerous than a perfectionist with a hardware store nearby. The moment the ship docked in Hilo, he ignored the volcanoes and the waterfalls completely. He took a cab straight to a local hardware store and bought 3 fat rolls of heavy, completely opaque black sheeting and 10 rolls of silver duct tape. That night, he got to work. The plan was simple enough, a light-proof blackout tent on his own balcony. But then his perfectionism took the wheel. He decided the glow bleeding out of the cabins beside him would wreck his exposures. So he leaned out precariously over the glass dividers and taped the thick black plastic across the entire front of his balcony. And then he kept going. He sealed the sheeting straight over the balconies to his left and his right as well, wrapping 3 separate staterooms into one airtight pitch-black cocoon. What Raymond never once stopped to consider was who else was living inside that cocoon. At 3:15 in the morning, the elderly couple next door, Walter and Ruth, got up for a bathroom trip. Walter heard a strange rustling, opened his balcony door, and walked face first into a solid, unbroken wall of black. Convinced the ship had rolled over and they were now sinking into the dark Pacific, he slammed the emergency medical button with both fists. Within 3 minutes, a medical team and 2 security officers came pounding down the hallway, swiped the master key, and burst inside. Finding the couple frozen in absolute terror, the officers shouldered the balcony door and tore straight through the heavy plastic sheeting. As moonlight and cool sea air came flooding into the room, they turned their heads to the left. And there sat Raymond, parked in a camp chair beside his telescope, pinned dead center in the beam of their flashlights. He did not ask whether his neighbors were alive. He did not apologize for accidentally staging a submarine disaster. Instead, he flung a hand over his eyes, threatened to sue the officers for destroying his night vision with those flashlights, and formally demanded the cruise line reimburse the $90 he'd wasted on now useless duct tape. 7. It took exactly 1 guided garden tour to convert a retired Homeowners Association president into the self-appointed plant life inspector of the entire Pacific. Gary, from suburban Denver, spent 2 hours wandering a Maui botanical garden on day 4, and somewhere between the ferns and the flowering shrubs, he decided he now understood tropical horticulture better than every botanist in Hawaii combined. He came back to the ship a changed and dangerous man. He strode into the main atrium and began openly scrutinizing the crew like a health inspector, prowling a restaurant kitchen. The line had just rolled out a cheerful new casual uniform for the bar staff. A bright Hawaiian-style shirt covered in a repeating print of big red blossoms. Everyone else saw a festive shirt. Gary saw an atrocity against botany. He set up camp beside the martini bar, hauled a freshly purchased hardcover encyclopedia of Polynesian flora out of his backpack, and flagged down the hotel director. Then, with the grim glee of a man issuing a zoning citation, he cracked the book open and triumphantly proved that the flower printed on those shirts was a South American orchid, not the native Hawaiian hibiscus it was pretending to be. This, he informed the entire bar, was a grotesque act of geographic fraud that was single-handedly poisoning his immersive vacation. An apology was never going to cut it. He formally demanded the cruise line recall and incinerate all 840 crew uniforms currently aboard. When the hotel director gently noted that they could not legally leave the entire hospitality staff bare-chested for the rest of the voyage over a mislabeled flower, Gary went to war. He marched to guest services, requested a pen, and covered 4 handwritten pages with a formal grievance, officially demanding that his daily automatic gratuities be seized and rerouted to whatever mainland designer had defaced the ecosystem, fully satisfied that he had just defended the honor of the Hawaiian Islands from a crime committed in cheap polyester. 8. About 2 hours out of Honolulu, the ship settled into a steady 22 knots, and a premium aft balcony cabin quietly began transforming into the inside of an industrial sandblaster, with the man responsible stretched out in the blast zone in his swim trunks. To understand how Martin ended up there, you have to understand Martin. He and his wife Diane, a married couple from Winnipeg, were genuinely revolted by the thought of sharing the famous Waikiki sand with strangers, thanks to a loud, unshakable dread of other people's germs. And yet they still wanted the romantic oceanfront beach day. So during the port stop in Honolulu, Martin flagged a taxi, drove straight to an upscale landscaping boutique, and bought 60 pounds of premium, sterilized white Zen garden sand. Dragging a heavy sack of gravel back through the terminal security scanner earned him a few long stares, but it broke no actual laws. He hauled it into their balcony cabin, and there the master plan revealed itself. He would empty the entire load onto the teak balcony deck and build his own pristine, germ-free slice of private beach right outside the sliding glass door. He raked it smooth, pulled on his trunks, and lay back in the sun, deeply pleased with his own genius. The flaw in the engineering surfaced about 2 hours later, when the ship cleared the island and opened up to full cruising speed. That open ocean wind turned his spotless little retreat into a weaponized dust storm in seconds. Anyone who has fought to sweep beach sand off a wooden floor knows it is a miserable, losing battle. And now picture that floor bolted to a moving ship in a stiff headwind. Thousands of sterilized silica grains launched into the air at once, cementing themselves into his wet sunscreen, jamming the sliding door track solid, and blasting straight into the cabin to bury the bed under a thick layer of grit. Rather than admit that basic physics had ruined his afternoon, Martin got housekeeping on the line and furiously ordered them up to vacuum his balcony that instant, insisting the captain was sailing this fast on purpose, purely to sabotage his romantic ambiance. 9. Patricia's opening request to the ship's engineers was almost modest, by her standards. Drain the entire main swimming pool, truck in 3 tons of real beach sand, and release a school of live imported koi into the shallow end, so her daughter could be married beside a genuine Hawaiian lagoon. Patricia, a ferociously organized mother of the bride from Houston, had booked 14 mid-range balcony cabins for her 40-person wedding party, and somewhere in that transaction she had convinced herself she now held executive command over a 4,000-passenger ship. The hotel director shut the lagoon idea down fast, citing a small mountain of structural, sanitary, and animal welfare problems. Patricia did not retreat. She simply found a new fixation. The pool water, she decided, was far too clear and sterile, and clashed horribly with the exact turquoise of the bridesmaids' dresses. So she demanded the crew pump premium organic coconut water into the hot tubs to give everything a soft, clouded, tropical look. Denied again, she decided the chain of command was merely a suggestion and handled the entire project personally, acrylics and all. During the ship's overnight in Maui, she caught a taxi to an industrial craft supplier and bought 3 enormous 32-ounce jugs of concentrated, commercial-grade blue fabric dye. At 4:30 the next morning, with the decks deserted, Patricia and her deeply unwilling sister crept up to the pool. She emptied every bottle straight into the main pool and both hot tubs, picturing a lovely, photogenic ocean blue by ceremony time. What she had completely failed to grasp was how a commercial pool filtration system actually works. The powerful circulation jets seize the dye and beat it into a violent, opaque, glowing sapphire soup. The true catastrophe hit at 7 that morning, when 9 bridesmaids, blissfully unaware that the pool had been sabotaged in the dark, dove in for a celebratory pre-wedding swim. That dye was engineered to bond permanently with cotton and polyester, and it attacked on contact, sinking into their skin, their pricey blonde highlights, and their designer white swimsuits. They climbed out looking like a bridal party that had been dunked headfirst into a vat of blueberry ink. When Patricia strolled up an hour later to admire her handiwork, she instead found the ship's maintenance team frantically scrubbing the permanently stained walls of the pool. Rather than confess that she had just dyed her own daughter's entire wedding party, a vivid electric blue, she stormed down to the front desk. She slammed her palm on the counter and demanded a $75,000 settlement, shrieking that the ship's poisonous, out-of-control chlorine had deliberately assaulted her family's complexions on the most important morning of their lives. 10. 10 minutes into one of the finest sunsets of the entire voyage, Margaret was already at the guest services desk, formally reporting the sky as defective. A 62-year-old retired interior designer from Charlotte, she had booked a premium balcony specifically for these famous Pacific sunsets, then proceeded to judge every one of them with the exact clipboard rigidity she'd once brought to a corporate kitchen remodel. So when the ship pulled away from Kauai and the horizon erupted in amber and violet, every other passenger reached for a camera and Margaret reached for paperwork. She slapped a heavy leather-bound Pantone, color-matching book onto the marble counter, flipped to a marked page, planted a heavily ringed finger on a glowing tangerine chip, and read its code number aloud like a judge handing down a sentence. The sunset outside, she declared, was simply the wrong color. Then out came the cruise brochure with its lushly overprocessed photo of a Hawaiian dusk, and she accused the company of flat-out bait and switch. She had built an entire expensive evening wardrobe around the precise color values printed in that brochure, and the actual Pacific had badly underdelivered on both contrast and saturation. The clerk, hopelessly out of his depth, tried to explain that the cruise line cannot control how sunlight scatters through the atmosphere. Margaret had no interest in physics. She wanted $80 in onboard credit, compensation for the sheer indignity of being made to stand there and watch a flat, amateur, washed-out sky underdeliver on the single evening she had actually dressed for it. 11. Chloe came storming back into the cruise terminal wearing the precise expression of a woman who had just been personally betrayed by marine biology. 28 years old and an aspiring lifestyle influencer from San Diego, she had booked the ship's premium whale-watching catamaran fully expecting the humpbacks to perform on cue. They had declined. She went straight to the shore excursions desk and demanded a full refund, complaining that the whales had been sluggish, distant, and thoroughly uncooperative, and she had come prepared. She pulled out her tablet and presented a painstakingly hand-drawn storyboard of the exact synchronized breaching sequence she required for her social media reel, laid out frame by frame, complete with tiny stick-figure whales arcing in perfect formation. Being shown nothing but a few puffs of mist and some far-off tail slaps, she insisted, was a literal breach of her contract, since the promotional video had clearly featured a whale launching its entire body out of the water. The excursion manager gently explained that these are wild animals following their own migratory instincts, and that the cruise line does not keep the local humpbacks on a rehearsal schedule. Chloe scoffed. She wanted to know why the ship hadn't sent a scuba team down at dawn with buckets of premium chum to rile the animals up and warm them before the paying guests arrived, as though a pod of 40-ton mammals could be talked into a morning dress rehearsal. The entire encounter only ended when she requested the direct phone number for the Hawaiian Department of Land and Natural Resources, fully intending to file a formal complaint against one specific adolescent humpback whale for missing its cues and personally sabotaging her brand. 12. On the ship's very first port day in Hilo, while everyone else chased waterfalls and botanical gardens, Julian spent $140 on a single bag of coffee beans and considered it the smartest purchase of the trip. Julian, a 30-year-old software developer from San Francisco, didn't brew coffee so much as perform surgery on it. The single-estate Kona beans were only the opening move. The next evening, he carried them into the main dining room, along with a digital laser surface thermometer and a portable French press zipped inside a velvet pouch, and he graciously allowed the waitstaff to supply the hot water and do the actual brewing, strictly under his unblinking, microscopic supervision. Now hold this image in your head for a second. The kitchen is plating dinner for 2,000 people, waiters are sprinting past under towering trays of prime rib, and Julian is sitting there calmly aiming a red laser at a glass carafe and counting down the seconds on a specialized stopwatch. It all fell apart during what he gravely called the extraction phase. He suddenly gasped and began fanning his hands over the cup in a panic. He summoned the maitre d' and furiously reported that the room's air conditioning was dragging the surface temperature of his brew down at a rate of 0.4 degrees per minute, an atrocity that was mercilessly destroying the fragile flavor notes of his Kona roast. He did not ask for a different table. He looked the maitre d' dead in the eye and demanded they shut down the central climate control for the entire two-story, 5,000-square-foot dining room until he had finished his cup. When the maitre d' declined to suffocate several thousand vacationers over a single coffee, Julian released a long, wounded sigh of pure martyrdom. Then he stood, gathered up every heavy leather-bound menu from the empty tables around him, and assembled a foot-tall barricade around his mug. He settled in behind this wall of menus and loudly instructed the passing waiters to slow to a crawl near his seat, so their movement wouldn't stir up any ruinous little drafts across the surface of his coffee. Here's what gets me. Not one of these passengers ever considered that they might be the problem. The tuna was wrong, the pool was the wrong blue, the sunset clashed with an outfit. It's always paradise that failed, never the person yelling at it. So which meltdown was the most unhinged, and would you have refunded a cent of it? Write about it below, subscribe, and hit like.